The impossible just happened. A seasoned prosecutor walked into his own trap on live television. Have you ever watched a high-ranking politician try to outsmart a rival, only to realize within seconds that they've made a catastrophic mistake? That is precisely what just unfolded in the House Judiciary Committee, and the footage is currently sending shockwaves across social media. While many viewers expected a dry afternoon of bureaucratic procedural talk, what they got instead was a masterclass in how a carefully rehearsed plan can incinerate in less than 120 seconds under the heat of real-time accountability. The atmosphere inside the committee room was thick with a quiet, vibrating tension that usually precedes a major political storm. You could hear the constant hum and click of high-definition cameras as they focused on the primary players. On one side sat Adam Schiff, looking every bit the confident, veteran investigator. He appeared meticulously prepared, his notes stacked neatly, his expression wearing that familiar, slightly patronizing grin of a man who believes he is 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. Directly across from him was Jim Jordan. In stark contrast to Schiff's performative energy, Jordan maintained a calm, almost bored demeanor. He sat back, adjusting his glasses with the steady hand of someone who wasn't just ready for the fight, but who already knew how the final round would end. The conflict hit its first peak when Schiff leaned forward, eyes flicking toward the cameras to ensure his big moment was captured perfectly. He began spinning what he thought was a foolproof legal web, attempting to use the committee's own record as a weapon. With a sharp, authoritative tone, Schiff demanded to enter into the record the chairman's correspondence with the White House regarding a specific subpoena. It was a classic gotcha move, designed to imply that the committee had been acting in bad faith or ignoring standard protocols. Schiff's staffers froze, waiting for the impact. The room seemed to hold its breath. Schiff was certain he had cornered his opponent in a procedural dead end. However, Jordan didn't even blink. Without a hint of hesitation or the defensive posture Schiff clearly expected, Jordan replied with 2 simple, devastating words. No objection. The instant compliance caught Schiff completely off guard. You could practically see the gears grinding to a halt behind his eyes as his rehearsed trap snapped shut not on Jordan, but on his own narrative. Schiff had built his entire offensive on the assumption that Jordan was hiding a long trail of ignored communications. Yet Jordan's immediate agreement to open the records suggested there was nothing to hide. This sudden flip of the narrative was the exact moment the internet exploded, as viewers realized the hunter had just become the prey. As the cameras zoomed in on Schiff's tightening expression, Jordan prepared to drop a single date that would render Schiff's hours of preparation entirely irrelevant. Schiff realized the trap had snapped shut on his own hand, but instead of retreating, he decided to double down on a legal precedent he thought Jordan didn't understand: the 48-hour revelation. The room fell silent as Jordan uttered the words that made Schiff's entire argument irrelevant. It was a single sentence, delivered with the rhythmic precision of a man who had been waiting hours to pull the rug out from under his opponent's feet. For months, the narrative pushed by several figures in Washington suggested that the Judiciary Committee was operating in a vacuum, ignoring the necessary protocols of executive branch coordination. Adam Schiff had built his entire presence at that day's hearing on this very premise. He sat there, eyes flicking toward the cameras, waiting for the soundbite that would confirm Jim Jordan's alleged negligence. But the soundbite he got was not the one he rehearsed. Jordan leaned into his microphone, adjusted his glasses, and stated matter-of-factly that the very first time the White House had reached out to the committee was exactly 48 hours ago. The impact was visible. Schiff's physical reaction was immediate and telling. The practiced courtroom rhythm he had maintained since the start of the hearing suddenly vanished. He began shuffling his notes, looking for a pivot that didn't exist, while his eyes darted toward the gallery as if searching for a friendly face. The gotcha grin was gone, replaced by the tightened expression of a man who realized he had just walked into a buzzsaw. He stammered, repeating the words 2 days ago, as if trying to process the timeline in real time. Jordan, steady as ever, didn't give him an inch of breathing room. He confirmed it. Yes, 2 days ago. And before that, there was no communication. None. This revelation exposed a massive communication breakdown that turned the procedural game on its head. Imagine preparing for a major presentation for 6 months, only for your boss to send you the crucial data 48 hours before you walk on stage. That is exactly the kind of tactical delay the committee was dealing with. The conflict was no longer about the committee's failure to seek accommodation. It was about the executive branch's calculated delay. Jordan leaned in further, his voice dropping to a level of calm intensity that commanded the entire room. He explained that he wasn't clairvoyant. He couldn't respond to a White House that had effectively gone radio silent for months. "You want me to be clairvoyant?" Jordan asked with a faint, knowing smile. "Read their minds before they even decide to say something?" That line drew a wave of quiet chuckles from the gallery. It was the sound of the audience recognizing a common-sense argument cutting through a thick layer of political theater. Think about the absurdity of Schiff's position for a second. He was effectively arguing that the committee should have predicted exactly when the White House would suddenly decide to engage. But how can you coordinate with someone who refuses to pick up the phone? This is a classic move in the Washington playbook. Stay silent for months, then send a letter at the 11th hour and claim the other side is being unprecedented or uncooperative. It is a strategy designed to create a headline, not to find the truth. If you've ever dealt with a coworker who waits until the deadline to mention a major problem, you know exactly how frustrating this dragging of feet can be. The shift in the room was palpable. Schiff had entered the session as the confident prosecutor, prepared to lecture the committee on institutional integrity. In less than 2 minutes, he had been transformed into a cornered witness, forced to defend a timeline that made the administration look like it was intentionally obstructing a lawful investigation. The tension arc of the hearing had reached its first major peak, and the resolution was a clear victory for Jordan's no-nonsense approach. The White House had waited until 48 hours before the hearing to suddenly remember the concept of executive privilege, and the committee wasn't going to let them hide behind that last-minute tactic. This wasn't just a legal debate. It was a public exposure of how the administrative state tries to bypass congressional oversight by simply running out the clock. If you're watching this and thinking, "Wait, is this even allowed?" You're not alone. This is exactly why you need to stay tuned, because what Jordan reveals next about the destruction of evidence will leave you speechless. This 48-hour revelation was just the tip of the iceberg. It exposes a deeper issue: the weaponization of silence. When one branch of government refuses to acknowledge the authority of another until the cameras are rolling, democracy isn't just decaying. It's being actively bypassed for the sake of political optics. The energy in the room had shifted completely toward the chairman's side. The reporters in the back rows, usually composed, were now scribbling furiously, recognizing that the obstruction narrative had just been flipped on its head. It wasn't the committee ignoring the White House. It was the White House ignoring the committee until they realized a public hearing was unavoidable. This is a moment you need to share right now, because the mainstream narrative won't tell you about this timeline. Hit that like button if you believe transparency should be the standard, not a last-minute favor granted by the powerful. We need to collectively demand that our institutions answer to the people, not to a political calendar. Schiff realized the trap had snapped shut on his own hand, but instead of retreating, he decided to double down on a legal precedent he thought Jordan didn't understand. He reached for a heavy binder, preparing to pivot from the timeline to the abstract world of legal theory. He adjusted his papers, his fingers slightly trembling, trying to regain his courtroom rhythm. He was moving from the facts of the calendar to the fog of judicial interpretation. If Schiff thought a complex court case would save his argument, he was about to be proven wrong in spectacular fashion. He adjusted his microphone one last time, his voice regaining a desperate edge of authority as he prepared to invoke the specific legal standards he believed would finally put Jordan on the defensive. "Mr. Chairman," Schiff began, his voice tightening with a forced gravitas, "your dismissive attitude toward established precedent is dangerous." He was clearly trying to regain the moral high ground, but the room wasn't buying the performance anymore. The audience knew the truth. The White House had sat on this for months. Jordan sat back, looking almost expectant, as if he had already read the very pages Schiff was about to cite. He knew that the law isn't a shield for those who act in bad faith. The stage was set for a clash, not just over dates, but over the very meaning of the law itself. Schiff was about to find out that when you quote the law to a man who follows the facts, the law becomes your own worst enemy. Don't go anywhere, because the next exchange involves a plot twist involving the Mazars ruling that Schiff definitely didn't see coming. This is the kind of accountability that Washington usually avoids at all costs, and it's happening right here, live, for the world to see. Schiff had opened the door to a legal debate, and Jordan was about to walk right through it, carrying the heavy weight of the facts with him. Every legal reference Schiff threw at him was about to bounce right off, and the resulting backfire would be even more damaging than the first. The battle for the narrative was far from over, but the momentum had shifted, and Schiff was running out of space to hide. What happened next would only drive that point home even further, proving that in the hall of the Judiciary Committee, rhetoric is no match for a clean record. The Mazars' defense and the double standard. If Schiff thought a complex court case would save his argument, he was about to be proven wrong in spectacular fashion. The hearing shifted from simple timelines to the heavy weight of legal precedent as Schiff attempted to hide behind the Mazars' ruling. He adjusted his microphone, his voice regaining a rehearsed, authoritative edge as he began lecturing the committee on the necessity of accommodation between the branches of government. Schiff was banking on the idea that the abstract complexity of Supreme Court decisions would confuse the narrative and paint the committee's oversight as an impulsive overreach. He spoke with the deliberate cadence of a seasoned prosecutor, citing constitutional balance and the supposed duty to coordinate with the executive branch before enforcing any subpoena. It was a calculated performance designed to reclaim the moral and legal high ground. But Jim Jordan was already several steps ahead. As soon as Schiff finished his opening salvo, Jordan countered by quoting the exact same Mazars' ruling back to him, but with a focus Schiff had conveniently omitted. Jordan hammered home the good faith requirement, a standard the White House had clearly failed to meet by remaining silent for months. Jordan's rebuttal turned the legal theory into a mirror of the administration's own obstruction. He leaned forward, pointing out that you cannot accommodate a party that refuses to engage until the very last second. This wasn't just a disagreement over legal interpretation. It was an exposure of a massive double standard. "The law applies to everyone," Jordan noted with a smirk, including the White House. This moment highlighted the core of the controversy. One side using the law as a shield to delay, while the other used it as a tool for transparency. The drama intensified when Jordan introduced the specific details of a private citizen involved in the case who had allegedly attempted to destroy evidence. He clarified that the documents in question were not the property of the White House, but were central to Congress's oversight responsibility. This wasn't a fishing expedition, as Schiff claimed, but a direct pursuit of facts that were being actively suppressed. Jordan then landed a devastating jab that left Schiff visibly shaken. He brought up Schiff's own history of leading investigations, specifically mentioning the secret basement hearings and the selective leaking of transcripts to the media during previous administrations. "You want to talk about precedent?" Jordan asked, his voice steady but biting. "How about the precedent you set when you ignored due process?" Schiff's jaw locked. He attempted to dismiss the comparison as irrelevant, but the damage was done. The tension in the room peaked as the audience realized the hypocrisy of demanding accommodation now, when Schiff had presided over some of the most closed-door, one-sided proceedings in recent memory. It was a classic, selective justice play. Schiff appeared to only find religion in restraint when the oversight started focusing on a Democrat in the White House. This stark contrast in behavior provided a deep insight into how procedural rules are often weaponized for partisan gain, rather than institutional integrity. This exchange is a perfect example of why so many people are currently disillusioned with political theater. When a leader demands that their opponents follow a set of rules that they themselves ignored when they held power, it erodes the very foundation of public trust. Think about your own life. How would you feel if a manager scolded you for a minor mistake while they were actively hiding major errors of their own? That is the exact dynamic that was playing out on live television. Jordan wasn't just debating a court case. He was defending the right of the American people to see what is happening behind the closed doors of their government. The mystery remains. Why did the White House wait until 48 hours before the hearing to suddenly remember the concept of executive privilege? This tactical delay suggests that the administration wasn't interested in the law, but in survival. By waiting until the 11th hour, they attempted to create a constitutional crisis where none existed, hoping that the sudden claim of privilege would stall the committee's progress. Jordan's refusal to play along with this script was a reminder that oversight is about accountability, not permission. He effectively argued that Congress shouldn't have to ask for permission to do the job the Constitution mandates. If you're finding this analysis valuable, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because the mainstream media is largely ignoring the specific legal back and forth that defined this hearing. We need to build a community that values raw facts over polished performances. What do you think about the use of the Mazars ruling in this context? Is it a legitimate defense, or just another barricade against the truth? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. We are at a turning point where the public's patience for bureaucracy is finally running out. As Jordan sat back, his calm demeanor remained unshaken, while Schiff was left scrambling to find a new angle of attack. The prosecutor had been thoroughly dismantled by his own evidence. Schiff realized that his legal shield had been shattered, and with the law no longer providing cover, he abandoned the technical details entirely. He gathered his notes, his fingers tightening around a pen as he prepared for one final, desperate move. He was about to leave the world of law and facts behind and retreat into the only territory he had left, the emotional and moral high ground. Schiff's voice dropped to a whisper, a sure sign he was shifting from lawyer to preacher, preparing to warn the room and the cameras about a supposedly imminent threat to the very stability of democracy. The atmosphere was about to get even heavier, and Jordan was waiting with a response that would turn the moral argument back on its head. Schiff's voice dropped to a somber tone as he prepared to deliver a performance of pure gravitas, signaling a shift from a legal battle to a moral crusade. The silence in the room became even more profound, as everyone waited to see if this last-ditch effort could salvage a narrative that was already slipping through his fingers. Schiff adjusted his microphone, his expression taking on a look of deep, performative concern for the future of the nation, as he prepared to lecture the committee one last time. But Jordan sat there, unfazed, ready to meet this new emotional tactic with the same cold, hard logic that had already dismantled Schiff's legal traps. The battle for the soul of the institution was just beginning, and the world was watching. Schiff was about to find out that when you use words like democracy as a shield, you'd better make sure your own record is clean enough to stand behind it. Jordan's next move would be to prove that trust isn't built on silence, but on the very transparency Schiff was trying to avoid. The final phase of the hearing was set to be the most intense yet, as the personal and the political finally collided in a way that would leave one man standing and the other silenced. Schiff cleared his throat, the sound echoing through the still room, and began what he hoped would be his saving grace, unaware that he was simply providing Jordan with the opening he needed to finish the debate once and for all. This was more than just a hearing now. It was a televised struggle for the truth. The moral high ground fallacy. Schiff's voice dropped to a whisper, a sure sign he was shifting from lawyer to preacher, preparing to warn the room and the cameras about a supposedly imminent threat to the stability of democracy. The air in the room thickened as he abandoned the legal statutes and leaned into pure gravitas. "Mr. Chairman," Schiff began, his tone somber and deliberate, "we are debating the very stability of our democracy. The contempt for precedent and institutional norms we see here is how democracies decay." It was a classic moral high ground play, designed to frame the committee's questions not as oversight, but as a dangerous erosion of government faith. Schiff wasn't just arguing a point, he was performing a duty to history, or so he wanted the audience to believe. Jim Jordan, however, remained entirely unfazed by the performance. He didn't interrupt the speech, but the moment Schiff paused for effect, Jordan countered with a line that would immediately go viral. "Democracy doesn't die because people ask questions, Congressman. It dies when the people in power stop answering them." The impact was instantaneous. A ripple of quiet agreement swept through the gallery, a mix of chuckles and knowing nods that signaled the audience had seen through the rhetoric. Jordan had effectively drained the emotional momentum from Schiff's argument by replacing abstract fear with cold, hard logic. Trust isn't built on silence or shielded by procedural walls. It is built on the truth, and Jordan was making it clear that accountability is the only real safeguard for a healthy republic. Jordan then turned the mirror back on Schiff, detailing the secret hearings Schiff had famously run in a basement during previous investigations. He framed it as a battle between truth versus control, reminding the room of how members of Congress were locked out of the process while selective transcripts were leaked to the media to shape a specific narrative. "You claimed it was for national security," Jordan noted, leaning forward. "But was that about the truth, or was it about controlling the narrative?" Schiff's posture shifted noticeably as the cameras caught his growing frustration. The moral crusader persona was crumbling under the weight of his own precedent. Jordan pointed out the glaring double standard. When the target was a political opponent, Schiff couldn't issue subpoenas fast enough. But now that the same standard applied to the current administration, he had suddenly found religion in restraint. This is a powerful lesson for all of us in the age of digital information. We often see public figures use high-minded language to shield themselves from uncomfortable questions. But, as Jordan demonstrated, institutional integrity isn't about protecting the feelings of those in power. It's about transparency. If you find yourself in a situation where someone is using policy or procedure to avoid giving you a straight answer, remember this exchange. Accountability isn't a performance, it's a requirement. Don't let the gravitas of a situation distract you from the missing facts. As the tension in the room reached a fever pitch, Schiff exhaled sharply through his nose, a clear sign that his emotional play had failed to land. He looked down at his notes, realizing that neither the law nor morality was providing him with the cover he needed. But Schiff wasn't finished yet. There was one path left, a desperate, final attempt to reclaim authority by going after Jordan personally. A sense of mystery hung in the air. What could he possibly try next when every other move had backfired? The room watched in stunned silence, sensing that the hearing was about to take its most personal turn yet. Schiff straightened his papers, clenching his jaw as he prepared to strike at the chairman's own credibility. Stay with us, because what comes next is a raw, unscripted exchange that stops the entire committee in its tracks. Hit that like button right now if you think politicians should spend more time answering questions and less time making speeches. Comment accountability below if you're tired of the political theater. You won't want to miss the final showdown, where the playbook itself becomes the centerpiece of the conflict. Schiff was about to make a move that would prove to be his biggest mistake of the day, and the resolution would leave only one man standing. Schiff's eyes flicked to the clock, realizing he was running out of time and out of friends in the room. He took a slow breath, clearly recalibrating for a final assault on the chairman's reputation, unaware that he was walking into a mirror that would reflect his own tactics back at him. The stage was set for the ultimate clash of credibility. Schiff's voice sharpened as he prepared to deliver a jab he thought would be the finishing blow. But Jordan was already leaning back, expectant and ready. This was no longer just a hearing. It was a battle for the very soul of oversight. The American people deserve to know who is fighting for the truth and who is fighting for the institution. As the cameras zoomed in on Schiff's tightening jaw, the entire room held its breath for the final act of this 2-minute implosion. Jordan sat ready, a man who knew that when you have the facts on your side, you don't need a lawyer or a somber speech. The final gavel strike was coming, but first, the personal playbook was about to be exposed for the world to see. Schiff's last-ditch effort was about to become the very soundbite he dreaded. The momentum was gone, and the narrative was now firmly in Jordan's hands. The silence that followed Schiff's exhaled breath said it all. The moral high ground had turned into a sinkhole. Every viewer watching at home could feel the shift. The performance was over, and the reckoning had arrived. Schiff opened his mouth to speak one last time, his voice lacking the conviction it held just minutes before, while Jordan simply watched, waiting to close the record on a day Adam Schiff would soon wish to forget. This is the moment where the theater stops and the truth begins. Schiff's final attempt to frame Jordan as the villain was about to fail, proving that in the House of the People, honesty remains the most powerful weapon of all. The final resolution was just seconds away, and it would be delivered with a gavel strike that echoed far beyond the committee room walls. Schiff gathered his papers, his movements stiff and mechanical, as he prepared to face the reality of a plan that had completely backfired on live TV. Jordan reached for the gavel, but he had one more point to make, a point that would redefine the entire hearing. The battle of words was ending, but the impact of the truth was just beginning to be felt by everyone watching. Schiff's silent retreat was the only reply left. The story of the 2-minute implosion was complete, but the lesson of accountability would resonate for a long time to come. Don't blink, because the final seconds of this exchange are the ones history will remember most. Schiff's somber tone had been a mask, and Jordan had just unmasked the reality of political oversight. The hearing was adjourned, but the verdict from the public was already in. Truth doesn't need a lawyer, and it certainly doesn't need a somber performance to be heard. The facts had spoken, and they were louder than any speech Adam Schiff could deliver. This was the end of the line for the procedural games. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Jordan struck the gavel, and with it, the narrative was settled. Schiff's plan hadn't just failed. It had served as the perfect platform for the very accountability he was trying to avoid. The internet had exploded for a reason. They had just witnessed a masterclass in exposing the truth. The moral high ground fallacy was over. Now, the facts were the only things left on the record. Schiff quietly exited, his confident smirk a distant memory, while Jordan stayed behind to ensure every word was documented for the court and for the people. The 2-minute implosion was the moment everything changed. Personal jabs and the constitutional mirror. The air in the committee room was so thick with tension that it felt as though the clerk and the surrounding staffers had stopped breathing altogether. This was the moment the procedural debate transformed into a raw, personal reckoning. Adam Schiff, sensing his grip on the narrative slipping, launched a final, sharp strike at Jim Jordan's reputation. He leaned back, his eyes narrowed with a dismissive coldness, and told Jordan that his credibility on the issue of oversight was, at best, complicated. It was a blatant attempt to smear the chairman's character in front of the cameras, hoping a personal insult would distract from the factual collapse of the White House's defense. Schiff spoke with the practiced rhythm of an elite prosecutor, but his words lacked the weight of the evidence Jordan had already placed on the record. Jordan didn't blink at the insult. Instead, he met Schiff's gaze with a steady, knowing look that seemed to signal he had been waiting for exactly this kind of desperation. Complicated? Jordan repeated, his voice calm, but possessing a dangerous edge. "You want me to be clairvoyant, Adam? Or do you want to talk about the real problem here?" This led directly into what viewers are now calling the playbook exchange, a moment that stripped away the veneer of Washington professionalism to reveal the power struggle beneath. Jordan leaned forward, directly challenging the man across from him. "You're not actually angry because we're breaking rules," Jordan stated, his voice echoing through the silent room. "You're angry because we're using your own playbook against you." The impact of that line was immediate. A stunned silence fell over the gallery. You could see the staffers in the background freeze as the truth of the statement landed. Jordan was exposing the reality that the very procedural games Schiff had perfected over the years were now being turned back on him, and he had no defense for it. Jordan didn't stop there. He defined the fundamental difference between their approaches in a way that left Schiff visibly stopped cold. "Here's the difference," Jordan continued. "You used procedure to protect power. We're using it to expose power. That's the line you don't like." This wasn't just a political jab. It was a philosophical dismantling of Schiff's entire career as an investigator. It was the moment the prosecutor realized he had been put on trial by his own past actions. This exchange brings us to a profound insight regarding the American Constitution. Throughout the hearing, Schiff had tried to use the law as a shield, a series of walls and bureaucratic layers meant to keep the executive branch hidden from public view. But Jordan presented a different vision, the Constitution as a mirror. He argued that the law reflects what we actually do, not what we pretend to stand for. When the White House stonewalls and politicians defend that silence, the mirror reflects a reality that is far from flattering. Accountability, in Jordan's view, isn't about legal theater. It's about whether or not you have the courage to let the people see the truth. Jordan then delivered his final philosophical blow, a statement that has since become a definitive soundbite for the entire hearing. The law was meant to protect liberty, Adam, not bureaucracy. It was a reminder that government institutions exist to serve the citizens, not to provide cover for the powerful. As those words hung in the air, the cameras caught Schiff staring down at his blank notes. The confident smirk that had defined the start of his testimony was gone. He shuffled a few papers, but it was clear to everyone in the room and the millions watching at home that he had no more moves left. His rehearsed talking points had been rendered useless by a man who refused to play the procedural game. For anyone who feels like the government has become a maze of red tape and hidden agendas, this moment is a powerful reminder of why we must demand transparency. We often see the process being weaponized to protect those at the top, while the average person is left in the dark. Jordan's refusal to back down is a signal that the old playbook of Washington silence is no longer enough to stop a determined search for the facts. If you believe that the law should be a window for the people rather than a wall for politicians, hit that share button right now. We need more people to see this constitutional mirror in action. Schiff sat there, his pen clutched tightly in his hand, unable to find a clean rhetorical angle to counter the chairman's logic. He had come to the committee room expecting to deliver a lecture, but he ended up receiving a masterclass in accountability. The personal jabs had backfired, the legal traps had failed, and the moral high ground had crumbled. All that was left was the stillness of a man who realized his influence over the narrative had evaporated in real time. Schiff exhaled one last time, a sharp, defeated sound that signaled the end of his offensive. The gavel was hovering, but Jim Jordan had one more sentence that would define the entire hearing for the public. A closing statement that would prove once and for all that in the battle for the American spirit, truth doesn't need a lawyer to defend it. The final act was about to begin, and the message sent to the White House would be unmistakable. Schiff realized that history was indeed watching, but it wasn't recording the sound bites he had spent weeks preparing. It was recording the moment the performance finally stopped and the truth took the floor. Schiff's silent retreat was the only reply left, as the energy in the room moved definitively toward a conclusion that no one would soon forget. The stage was set for the final gavel, but the lesson of the constitutional mirror would resonate far longer than the sound of the strike. This was the moment the theater ended and the reality of oversight began. Schiff had no more move. The game was over, the record was clean, and the American people finally had their answer. Jordan sat back, his eyes locked on his opponent, waiting for the final word that would turn this 2-minute implosion into a permanent reminder of the power of the truth. Schiff's papers were stacked, his microphone was off, and for the first time all day he had absolutely nothing to say. Jordan reached for the gavel, but the silence he left behind spoke louder than any closing argument could. The realization was final. The truth doesn't need protection from politics. It only needs someone brave enough to say it out loud. Schiff's plan hadn't just failed. It had served as the perfect platform for the very accountability he was trying to avoid. The internet had exploded for a reason. They had just witnessed a masterclass in exposing the truth. The moral high ground fallacy was over. Now, the facts were the only things left on the record. Schiff quietly exited, his confident smirk a distant memory, while Jordan stayed behind to ensure every word was documented for the court and for the people. The 2-minute implosion was the moment everything changed. Jordan adjusted his microphone one last time, looking straight into the lens. The final resolution was just seconds away. Schiff was out of time. The people were watching, and the truth was ready to speak. Jordan's hand tightened on the gavel. The hearing was over, but the message was just beginning to spread. Schiff's silent departure was the ultimate confirmation. The plan had backfired. The narrative was Jordan's. The truth was out. And the performance had finally come to an end. Jordan struck the gavel, and with it he closed the book on Adam Schiff's failed trap. The sound echoed through the room, a final, sharp punctuation mark on a day that redefined political oversight. Schiff was gone, but the record would remain. And as the committee adjourned, the world knew that in this room, substance had finally triumphed over spectacle. Schiff's plan was finished. The truth had won, and Jim Jordan was just getting started. Truth doesn't need a lawyer. As the echo of the final gavel strike filled the room, the message sent to the White House was unmistakable. Jim Jordan didn't just end the session. He punctuated it with a strategic masterstroke by emphasizing the clean record the committee had established. By securing an undisputed timeline of the White House's 48-hour last-minute engagement, Jordan effectively set a trap for any future court review. If the administration tries to claim they were cooperative in a legal challenge, this clean record will serve as the primary evidence of their delay. It was a victory of substance over procedure, proving that no amount of legal maneuvering can erase the cold, hard facts of the calendar. The closing argument that immediately began trending globally was a quiet, 5-word rebuke that summarized the entire afternoon. Truth doesn't need a lawyer. The sight of Adam Schiff quietly gathering his papers and leaving the room without another word spoke volumes. The confident, smiling prosecutor who had walked in ready to lecture the committee was gone, replaced by a man who realized that his influence over the narrative had completely evaporated. As he walked toward the exit, the stillness of the room felt heavier than the hours of debate that preceded it. This wasn't just a failed trap, it was a public reminder that when accountability finally arrives, the scripted performances of Washington theater are the first things to burn away. Substance had triumphed over spectacle, and the viral reaction online confirmed that the American people were paying close attention to who was actually demanding answers. The primary lesson from this 2-minute implosion is simple. Process without purpose is just noise. We often see politicians hide behind complex rules and institutional norms to avoid the simple duty of being honest with the public. But as Jim Jordan demonstrated, those rules are meant to facilitate the truth, not to act as barricades against it. Oversight isn't a talk show or a theatrical performance. It is a fundamental responsibility of Congress to ensure that power answers to the people who gave it. When a committee stops asking questions, democracy truly begins to decay. But when they persist in the face of obstruction, the system actually works. The hearing ended, but the conversation was just beginning. This confrontation serves as a blueprint for how to handle bureaucracy. Stay focused on the facts, refuse to be distracted by procedural fog, and never accept silence as an answer. If you believe that our elected officials should spend more time producing results and less time performing for the cameras, then you need to make your voice heard. History, as Schiff correctly predicted, was indeed watching, but it didn't record his warnings. It recorded the moment the truth took the floor. In the battle between legal theater and raw accountability, who do you believe truly represents the interest of the American people? Is it the side using procedure to protect power, or the side using it to expose the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep the pressure on for real transparency. The future of oversight hearings depends on whether we, the people, continue to demand that facts speak louder than speeches. Truth doesn't need a lawyer, and it's time we started treating our government with that exact standard.